At 11 at night, a single text made me realize I was not a daughter, but a convenient backup plan. I explicitly said no. Regardless, they arrived this morning with 4 children and packed suitcases, assuming I would cave. They have no idea that last night, I uncovered a financial secret that means this family will never control me again. My name is Quinn George. I am 34 years old, and until tonight, I was under the delusion that I owned my own life. I was sitting at my kitchen island, the only piece of furniture in my apartment that truly felt substantial, nursing a cup of chamomile tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Outside, the relentless Seattle rain was hammering against the glass, a rhythmic drumming that usually helped me decompress after a shift. My apartment complex is located in SeaTac, less than 10 minutes from the terminals. Most people would hate the noise. They would hate the way the windows rattle slightly when a heavy cargo plane takes off at 2 in the morning. But I loved it. The roar of the engines was the sound of my paycheck. It was the sound of precision, of logistics, of things going exactly where they were supposed to go. I am the operations manager for Pacific Rim Airways. It is not a job for the faint of heart or the disorganized. My life is ruled by the 24-hour clock, by union regulations, by weather patterns over the Pacific, and by the absolute necessity of maintaining order in chaos. I live by a schedule so tight that I schedule my laundry in 15-minute increments. I was staring at the dark screen of my work laptop, mentally preparing for the shift that would start in 5 hours. My alarm was set for 3:30 in the morning. I had a crew briefing at 4:15 and a potential strike looming with the baggage handlers. I needed sleep. I needed silence. I needed the boundaries of my solitary life to remain firm and unbreached. Then, my personal phone vibrated against the granite countertop. It was not a call, just a single text message. The screen lit up, slicing through the dim mood lighting of my kitchen. The name at the top read, Brielle. I stared at it. Brielle, my younger sister, the golden child, the chaotic whirlwind that my parents had spent the last 3 decades shielding from consequences. We had not spoken in 3 weeks, not since I told her I could not loan her $500 for a deposit on a rental car she did not need. I picked up the phone, expecting an apology, or perhaps another request for money masked as a casual check-in. Instead, I read the words that made my stomach drop all the way to the floor. Hey Quinn, change of plans for the trip. Your apartment is closer to the airport than the hotel, so I am dropping off the 4 kids tonight. Be there in 40 minutes. I blinked. I read it again. It was written with the casual tone of someone telling me they were picking up milk on the way home. There was no question mark. There was no please. There was no "is this okay?" It was a statement of fact, a command issued from the Queen to her subject. My heart rate spiked. A familiar physiological reaction I had been trying to unlearn in therapy for 2 years. It was the physical manifestation of guilt and obligation, programmed into me since I was old enough to tie my own shoes. I typed back, my fingers flying across the glass, fueled by a sudden surge of defensive panic. Brielle, what are you talking about? I am working tomorrow. I have to be up at 3:30. You cannot bring the kids here. My apartment is not child-proofed. I have glass tables and 0 food for children. No. I hit send. I stared at the word no. It looked strong. It looked definitive. In my line of work. When I said a plane did not fly, it did not fly. I was used to my word being law. But in the Warren family hierarchy, my word was merely a suggestion, and usually a poor one. The 3 dots of her typing bubble appeared instantly. She had not even paused to process my refusal. Don't be dramatic. Quinn, Mom said it is fine. It saves us $300 on 2 hotel rooms. Plus, our flight is at 6 in the morning, so we need to leave early anyway. It just makes sense. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. Mom said it is fine. The magic phrase. The trump card. As if my mother, living 2 hours away in a house I paid the heating bill for last winter, had jurisdiction over the square footage of my apartment, as if my lease had a clause that said, subject to approval by Marianne Warren. I typed again, slower this time, trying to keep the rage from making my thumbs clumsy. I said no. Brielle, Do not come here. I cannot take them. I have a high-pressure shift. I need sleep. Go to the hotel you booked. I waited. The rain lashed harder against the window, sounding like hail now. A heavy Boeing 777 roared overhead, shaking the floorboards, but I barely heard it. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. The response came 30 seconds later. We are already in the Uber. Mom gave me the spare key you left at her house for emergencies. See you soon. The air left the room. The spare key. I closed my eyes, and the memory washed over me with the stinging clarity of a slap. 6 months ago, I had given my mother a spare key. I had done it after a minor surgery, just in case something happened and I could not get to the door. I had handed it to her with explicit instructions. This is for emergencies only: fire, flood, or blood. My mother had smiled that soft, sacrificial smile of hers and tucked it into her purse. Of course, Quinny, just for peace of mind. Peace of mind. Now that key was in the hands of my sister, traveling at 60 miles per hour down Interstate 5 towards my sanctuary. I stood up, pushing the stool back with a screech that echoed in the empty apartment. I walked to the front door and stared at the deadbolt. It was a standard lock. Nothing fancy. Anyone with the jagged piece of metal Brielle was holding could walk right in. This was not a request for a favor. This was an invasion. I looked around my living room. It was pristine. White rug, a glass coffee table with sharp corners, a collection of rare aviation models on a low shelf. Delicate, expensive, and completely breakable. This was a space designed for one adult woman who valued order and silence. It was not designed for Brielle's 4 children, aged 4 to 9, who had been raised with the philosophy that discipline stifles creativity. But it wasn't just about the mess. It wasn't even about the noise. It was the audacity. It was the absolute, crushing certainty that my time, my space, and my needs were secondary to their convenience. Brielle had 4 children and poor planning skills. Therefore, Quinn must suffer. That was the equation my family had been balancing for 30 years. I checked the time. 11:15 at night. If they were in an Uber, and they were coming from the south, they would be here in roughly 20 minutes. I paced the length of my small kitchen. My mind, usually so good at solving logistical problems, was spinning out. I could call the police. I imagined that scenario. Hello? Yes, my sister is coming over. It sounded ridiculous. Family disputes were civil matters. The officers would say, or worse, they would arrive, see a tired mother with 4 crying children in the rain, and look at me, the cold, career-focused woman in the warm apartment, as the villain. That was the trap. That was always the trap. They counted on my shame. They counted on the fact that I would not make a scene in the lobby of my own building. They knew I valued my reputation with my neighbors and the building management. They knew that when faced with the spectacle of my sister dragging 4 suitcases and 4 exhausted children into my hallway, I would sigh, step aside, and let them in. I would let them in, and I would sleep on the couch. I would wake up at 3:30 to the sound of a crying toddler. I would go to work exhausted, potentially making a mistake that could cost my airline thousands of dollars. I would come home to a trashed apartment, sticky handprints on my windows, and a note saying, "Thanks for the help," while they jetted off to whatever vacation they could not actually afford. I stopped pacing. I looked at the reflection of myself in the darkened window. I looked tired. I looked like a woman who had spent a lifetime bending over backward until her spine was permanently curved. Mom said it is fine. The anger flared hot and bright, burning away the fatigue. My mother had authorized this. My mother had handed over the key to my home as if she were the landlord. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated strike. They had probably planned this for weeks. Why book 2 hotel rooms near the airport when Quinn lives right there? Quinn has a pull-out couch. Quinn has a floor. Quinn does not have a husband or kids, so her space is public domain. I looked at the phone again. No more texts. Brielle was confident. She was probably telling the kids right now. Auntie Quinn is going to let us have a slumber party. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. It was the same feeling I got when a storm front moved in faster than predicted, and I had to ground an entire fleet. The situation had changed. The old flight plan was no longer valid. I walked over to the door and touched the cold metal of the lock. If I let them in tonight, I was teaching them that this was acceptable. I was teaching them that my no was just a noise I made before I eventually surrendered. I was validating every time my mother told Brielle, "Don't worry, your sister will handle it." But if I didn't let them in, I imagined the scene, the banging on the door, the shouting, the texts flying to the rest of the family. Quinn left us in the rain. Quinn hates her nieces and nephews. The narrative would be spun before sunrise. I would be the monster. I took a deep breath. I was 34 years old. I managed a team of 150 people. I controlled the movement of multi-million-dollar assets. And yet, standing in my own hallway, I felt like a scared little girl waiting to be scolded. That feeling, that small, shrinking feeling, that was what I hated most. I picked up my phone and dialed the building manager's emergency line. It went to voicemail. Of course. It was 11:20 at night. I looked at the text chain again. We are already in the Uber. They were coming, a wave of chaos crashing toward my shore. And for the first time in my life, I realized that building a seawall wasn't enough. I had to drain the ocean. I grabbed my purse. I grabbed my car keys. If they had the key to my apartment, I couldn't stop them from entering physically without a physical confrontation I wasn't ready for. But I could make sure that when they arrived, the victory would taste like ash. Wait, no. Running away was what the old Quinn would do. The old Quinn would go sleep in her car at the employee lot just to avoid the conflict. I put the keys down. I stared at the door. Mom gave me the spare key. The violation of trust was so absolute, it was almost breathless. That key was a symbol. It was a contract of safety. My mother had taken that contract and ripped it up to save Brielle $300. $300. That was the price of my privacy. That was the price of my security. I walked back to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept my tools. I pulled out a screwdriver. I wasn't going to run, and I wasn't going to let them in. But as I stood there, weighing the tool in my hand, another notification popped up on my phone. An email alert from my bank. Suspicious activity detected. I frowned. I swiped it open, my heart still hammering from the Brielle situation. I expected it to be a mistake, or maybe a recurring subscription I had forgotten. I looked at the transaction. It was a charge for $3,000. The merchant was a travel agency. The card ending in 4589. I froze. I didn't have a card ending in 4589. I clicked deeper into the notification. It was a credit card alert from a credit monitoring service I had signed up for years ago and rarely checked. A new card had been opened in my name 2 weeks ago. The billing address on the account was not my apartment. It was my parents' house. The screwdriver slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a loud clatter. The text from Brielle, the demand to stay, the sudden appearance of the family, the key. The pieces started to shift in my head. This wasn't just about crashing at my place to save money on a hotel. This wasn't just about a free ride. I looked at the time, 11:25. They were 5 minutes away. I looked at the banking alert, then I looked at the door. A cold, hard resolve settled over me, chilling the sweat on my back. The panic evaporated, replaced by a terrifyingly calm anger. It was the kind of calm that descends right before a plane crash, when you realize there is nothing left to do but brace for impact. They weren't just disrespecting my boundaries, they were stealing my life. And they were coming right to my door to do it. I picked up the screwdriver. I didn't need it to fix a lock. I needed to fix my life. But first, I had to survive the next hour. I walked to the door, engaged the deadbolt, and then slid the secondary chain lock into place, the one thing the spare key couldn't bypass. Then, I stood in the dark hallway and waited for the sound of the elevator. As I stood in the darkened hallway, staring at the brass chain of the secondary lock, the silence of the apartment began to feel heavy. It was not the peaceful silence I usually craved after a shift at the terminal. It was a suffocating silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums right before a structure collapses. I was waiting for the elevator chime, but my mind was miles away, pulled back to a Sunday afternoon 3 months ago. It was the last time I had sat at my parents' dining table. The memory was so vivid, I could smell the pot roast my mother had overcooked, a scent that always permeated their house along with the underlying odor of lemon furniture polish and passive aggression. That Sunday was supposed to be a celebration of my promotion to senior operations manager. I had been foolish enough to think that for once, the dinner might actually be about me. I arrived on time. I brought a bottle of wine that cost $60. I was wearing a tailored blazer that made me feel capable and successful. Brielle arrived 40 minutes late. She was wearing sweatpants. She dragged her 4 children in like a chaotic weather system, their noise instantly filling every corner of the small house. There was no apology for the lateness. There never was. "Oh, thank goodness you are here," my mother had said, rushing past me to take the baby from Brielle's arms. "Quinn, pour your sister some juice. She looks exhausted." I stood there, holding my $60 wine, and watched my father turn down the television. "Rough morning, Brie?" he asked, his voice soft, the tone he reserved exclusively for her. "The car wouldn't start again," Brielle whined, collapsing onto the sofa I had vacated. "And the landlord is threatening to charge a late fee if I don't pay by Tuesday. I just can't catch a break." And just like that, my promotion evaporated. The air in the room shifted. We were no longer celebrating my hard work. We were pivoting to the crisis of the week. This was the script we had been reading from for 20 years. We sat down to eat. I remember looking at the mound of mashed potatoes on my plate and feeling my appetite wither. My mother served Brielle first, giving her the largest portion. "So," my mother said, looking at me with that specific tilt of her head that signaled a request was coming. "Tell us about the new job. Quinny, does it come with a nice raise?" "It does," I said, slicing my meat. "It also comes with a lot more responsibility. I'm managing the entire Pacific logistics hub now." "That is wonderful," my mother said. She didn't smile. She just nodded, her eyes sliding over to Brielle, who was picking at her food with a tragic expression. "It is such a blessing that one of you is doing so well, especially with everything Brielle is going through." There it was, the bridge. "I'm trying, Mom," Brielle sniffed. "It's just hard with 4 kids and no help." "We know, sweetheart," my father soothed. Then, the pivot. My mother turned her full attention to me. "Quinn, since you are getting that raise, your father and I were thinking." I stopped eating. I knew this tone. It was the tone of a collection agent disguised as a saint. "Brielle needs $1,200 for the car repairs," my mother said. "And the rent is another $800. We can cover the rent, but our pension check doesn't clear until the 5th. If you could handle the car, it would take such a weight off everyone's shoulders." "Mom," I said, keeping my voice level. "I just put a down payment on a new car myself, and I have student loans. My budget is tight." "Tight," Brielle scoffed, finally looking up. "You live alone. Quinn, you don't have to buy diapers. You don't have to pay for daycare. You go on vacations." "I go on business trips," I corrected. "There is a difference." "You have so much more than her," my mother interrupted, her voice gaining an edge. "Family helps family. Quinn, that is what we do. We sacrifice for each other. You are the strong one. You have always been the strong one. Why do you have to be so difficult?" Difficult. That was the word they branded me with every time I tried to keep what I earned. If I gave them money, I was a good daughter. If I kept it, I was difficult. I was selfish. I was cold. "I am not being difficult," I said, feeling the familiar heat rising in my neck. "I am saying that just because I don't have children doesn't mean my money is public property. I work 60 hours a week." "And Brielle works 24 hours a day being a mother," my mother snapped, slamming her fork down. "Must you always make this a competition? Look at her. Quinn, she is crying." I looked. Brielle was indeed crying. Silent, practiced tears that rolled down her cheeks without messing up her mascara. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times. It was the weapon that disarmed any logic I tried to bring to the table. Fine, I had said that night. I pulled out my checkbook. I wrote a check for $1,200. I handed it to Brielle. She stopped crying instantly. "Thanks, Quinn," she mumbled, tucking the check into her bra. Nobody asked me how my shift had been. Nobody asked if I was tired. Nobody asked if I needed anything. I was not a person to them. I was a resource. I was an ATM that occasionally complained. Standing in my hallway now, gripping the screwdriver, I realized that dinner was the moment I should have walked away, but I hadn't. Instead, 2 weeks later, I had made the biggest mistake of all. I had gone in for a minor laparoscopic surgery, nothing life-threatening, but I needed someone to drive me home. My mother had volunteered. She had been an angel for exactly 48 hours. She made soup, she fluffed pillows, and in my medicated, vulnerable state, I had let my guard down. "You know," she had said, sitting on the edge of my bed while I was groggy from painkillers, "I worry about you up here all alone. What if you fall in the shower? What if you choke? You are so far away from us." "I'm fine, Mom," I had slurred. "Just for peace of mind," she had pressed, holding out her hand. "Give me a spare key. I'll keep it in the safe at home. We will never use it unless it is a life or death emergency. Please, Quinny, do it for your mother's heart." I gave her the key. I thought I was buying safety. I thought I was buying love. But as I stood there in the dark, listening to the rain battering Seattle, I realized I had not bought safety. I had handed them a master pass to my boundaries. To my mother. Emergency did not mean fire or flood. It meant Brielle was inconvenienced. It meant they wanted to save money. It meant my privacy was a negligible price to pay for their comfort. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They didn't respect me. They didn't even see me. To them. My apartment was just an extension of their living room. My bank account was an extension of their wallet. And my life was just a waiting room where I sat until they needed something. I looked at the secondary lock again. The chain was thin. A strong man could kick the door in and break it, but it wasn't about the metal. It was about the statement. For 34 years, the door to my life had been wide open. I had taken the hinges off myself, hoping that if I made myself accessible enough, helpful enough, compliant enough, they would finally love me for who I was, not what I could provide. But love shouldn't cost $1,200 a month. Love shouldn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. My phone buzzed in my pocket, shattering the memory. It was Brielle again. "Elevator is slow. Kids are cranky. Have the door open so we don't have to fumble with bags." I stared at the screen. She was in the building. She was in the elevator. She was coming up. The entitlement in those words made my blood turn to ice. Have the door open. Not, "Are you awake?" Not, "Is it okay?" Just an order. I looked at the transaction alert from the bank again. The $3,000. The fraud. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with a sickening precision. The dinner, the guilt trips about money, the constant probing about my salary, the key, and now, the credit card. They hadn't just crossed a boundary. They had crossed a legal line. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of my own home. Clean, quiet, and mine. "Not tonight," I whispered to the empty room. I walked over to the intercom system next to the door. It had a video feed of the hallway. I pressed the button to activate the screen. It flickered to life in black and white. The elevator doors at the end of the hall were just sliding open. I kept my finger hovering over the video intercom button, but I did not press it to speak. On the grainy black and white screen, I watched the doors of the elevator slide open. My sister stepped out first. She was not holding any bags. She was holding a Starbucks cup and looking at her phone. Behind her, her husband, Mark, struggled with 4 massive suitcases, while the 4 children spilled into the hallway like marbles dropped from a jar, bouncing off the walls and screeching with the pent-up energy of travel. Seeing them there, physically present in the sanctuary of my hallway, triggered a nausea that had nothing to do with illness and everything to do with history. This was not a new scene. It was a remix of a song I had been listening to for 15 years. I backed away from the screen and walked into my living room, sinking onto the arm of my sofa. I needed a moment before the inevitable pounding on the door began. My mind drifted back, not to a specific dinner, but to the architecture of my entire adulthood. I built this life brick by brick, with my own hands, using mortar made of sweat and sleep deprivation. I moved out at 18 with $200 in my pocket and a scholarship I had fought tooth and nail to secure, while my friends were going to parties. I was working the graveyard shift at a logistics warehouse, loading cargo onto pallets until my back felt like it was made of broken glass. I ate instant noodles for 3 years straight. I wore shoes until the soles flapped open like talking mouths. I never asked my parents for a dime, because I knew they did not have it. Or rather, I knew where their money was going. It was going to Brielle. Brielle, who dropped out of 3 different colleges because the professors were too mean or the schedule was too early. Brielle, who needed a new car because the old one didn't have the right vibe. Brielle, who got pregnant at 20 and decided that working was no longer compatible with her spiritual journey. For a long time, I bought into the narrative. I really did. I believed that I was just lucky. I was the one with the brain for numbers, the one with the sturdy constitution, the one who could function on 4 hours of sleep. Therefore, it was my cosmic duty to level the playing field. It started small. When I was 22 and landed my first junior operations role, Brielle called me crying because her electricity was about to be cut off. It was $80. I paid it. I felt good about it. I felt like a big sister. But $80 turned into $200 for a speeding ticket. $200 turned into $500 for a certification course in aesthetics that she never finished. "You are so good to her," my mother would say, beaming at me as if I had just donated a kidney. "It is just a rough patch. She will pay you back once she gets on her feet." But Brielle never got on her feet. She learned that she didn't have to. She learned that if she sat down, someone would bring her a chair, and that chair was usually paid for by me. The rough patch became a lifestyle. I remember one specific incident from 4 years ago. It was the moment the cracks in my blind loyalty began to show. Brielle had called me in a panic, claiming she needed $1,200 for emergency dental work for her oldest son. She sent me a photo of his swollen cheek. I was in a meeting with the regional directors, but I stepped out and transferred the money immediately. I didn't even ask for the dentist's name. It was for my nephew. You do not ask questions when a child is in pain. 2 days later, I saw photos on Facebook. Brielle and Mark had taken the kids to a theme park in California. Everyone was smiling. There was no swollen cheek. The caption read, "Spontaneous family getaway, because we deserve it." When I confronted my mother about it, shaking with rage, she had sighed the sigh of a martyr. "Oh, Quinn, don't be so literal. The poor boy's tooth got better on its own. They used the money to make memories. Isn't that better than a dentist's chair? You can make more money, but they can't make more childhoods. Why do you have to begrudge them a little happiness?" Begrudge? That was the moment I realized the game was rigged. My hard work was not my own. My salary was not a reflection of my value. It was a communal pot that they felt entitled to dip into whenever their own poor choices left them dry. I was not the daughter. I was the safety net. I was the insurance policy that never required a premium. That was the day I started the folder. I opened my laptop now, my hands steady. I clicked on a hidden folder nested deep within my hard drive, password protected and encrypted. It was labeled simply, Receipts. Inside was a spreadsheet that would make a forensic accountant weep. Every text message asking for cash, every Venmo transfer, every time I paid a utility bill directly, every time I covered a forgotten wallet at a restaurant, every time I paid for a flight they missed because they overslept. I had dates, I had screenshots, I had the excuses categorized by genre: medical scare, car trouble, landlord evil, and just because. I scrolled down to the bottom line. The sum total over the last 10 years was staggering. $42,650. That was a down payment on a house. That was a master's degree. That was a trip around the world. But it wasn't just the money. Looking at the spreadsheet, I saw something darker. I saw the pattern of control. They didn't just want my money, they wanted to keep me tethered. Every time I saved up enough to perhaps move away, or take a sabbatical, or do something reckless and fun, a crisis would emerge, a crisis that required exactly the amount of cushion I had built up. It was almost subconscious, this mechanism of theirs. If Quinn has too much, she might leave. If Quinn has too much, she might realize she doesn't need us. So we must create a need. We must manufacture an emergency to remind her of her place. Her place is here, carrying the load, fixing the leaks, patching the holes in our sinking ship. My mother's voice echoed in my head. You are the strong one. It wasn't a compliment. It was a shackle. They had weaponized my competence against me. They had turned my ability to survive into an obligation to ensure they never had to try. And now, looking at the banking alert on my phone, the $3,000 charged to a credit card I never opened, I realized that the spreadsheet was no longer just a way to vent my frustration. It was evidence. I had spent years collecting this data, not because I was stingy, as Brielle liked to claim, but because deep down, a part of me knew this day would come. The day when asking wouldn't be enough. The day when guilt trips wouldn't yield the desired result. The day they would stop waiting for me to give and simply decide to take. The banging on the door began. It was a rhythmic, entitled pounding, not the frantic knock of someone in trouble, but the heavy thud of someone who owns the place. Quinn, open up! It is freezing in this hallway. Brielle's voice was muffled by the wood, but the whine was unmistakable. Auntie Quinn, one of the kids yelled. I have to pee. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I did not move. I looked at the spreadsheet one last time. I looked at the date of the first entry, 10 years ago. Then I looked at the entry from 2 weeks ago, the credit card fraud. The transition from mooching to criminal had happened in silence, while I was busy working my 60-hour weeks. I closed the laptop. I was done being the person with better conditions. I was done being the backup plan. I was done being the bank that never closed. I walked to the door. I could hear Mark grumbling on the other side. She probably has headphones on. Call her again. I am calling her, Brielle snapped. She is declining it. What is her problem? I stood 2 inches from the wood. I could feel their presence radiating through it. My problem, I whispered to myself, is that I finally did the math. I checked the time. It was 11:40 at night. I took my phone and sent a single text to the building management security line, attached to the screenshot of the strangers in the hallway. There are people attempting to force entry into apartment 4B. I do not know them. Please remove them. It was the coldness of the lie that surprised me. I do not know them. But in a way, it was the truth. I knew the people they pretended to be. The loving sister, the struggling mother, but the people who would steal my identity and demand entry to my home in the middle of the night. The people who viewed me as a resource to be mined until empty. I did not know those people, and I did not want them in my house. The pounding got louder. Quinn, I know you are in there. I can hear you walking. I turned off the hallway light, plunging the apartment into darkness. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, clutching my phone and my evidence. Let them pound. Let them scream. Tonight, the Bank of Quinn was officially out of business, and tomorrow, the audit would begin. The 40 minutes between receiving Brielle's text and the arrival of the Uber were the longest of my life. They were a microcosm of my entire history with my family, compressed into a high-pressure diamond of panic and realization. The moment I dropped the screwdriver and stared at the credit alert on my phone, the hazy fog of familial obligation evaporated. I was no longer a sister being asked for a favor. I was a target being maneuvered into position. I did not sit down to cry. I did not pace the floor wringing my hands. My training kicked in. In operations management, when a crisis hits, you do not emote. You secure the perimeter. I picked up my phone and dialed the building's 24-hour concierge desk. My voice was steady, terrifyingly so. This is Quinn George in Unit 4B, I said. I need to update my access list effective immediately. There is a spare key fob in the possession of a Marianne Warren. I want that fob deactivated. If anyone attempts to use it, I want it flagged as unauthorized entry. The night concierge, a young man named David, who usually only spoke to me about package deliveries, sounded confused. Okay, Ms. George, I can wipe the code for that specific fob from the system. But if they have a physical metal key for the deadbolt? I know, I cut him off. I am handling the physical lock. Just kill the electronic access to the lobby and the elevator. Nobody comes up without my direct voice authorization. Is that clear? Crystal, David replied. I will log it now. I hung up. Step 1 was complete. They could still use the metal key to open my apartment door if they got to my floor, but they would have to get past the lobby security first. I was creating layers of friction. I was forcing them to make a scene if they wanted to get to me. Then, I sent the final text to Brielle. I did not want to leave any room for ambiguity. I did not want them to claim later that they thought I was joking. I have contacted building security. Do not come here. I am not letting you in. Go to the hotel. I watched the message deliver. I watched the read receipt appear instantly. 10 seconds later, my phone rang. It was not Brielle. It was my mother. The ringtone, usually a source of mild anxiety, sounded like a siren tonight. I stared at the screen. Part of me, the part that was still a little girl wanting approval, wanted to let it go to voicemail. But the new part of me, the part forged in the fire of this betrayal, needed to hear her say it. I answered on the third ring. I am not opening the door, Mom. Quinn Marie! My mother's voice was shrill, vibrating with that specific frequency of indignation she reserved for when I failed to follow the script. Have you lost your mind? Your sister's in a car with 4 sleeping children. It is 11 o'clock at night. I told her no, I said. My hand was gripping the granite counter so hard my fingernails were turning white. I told her I have work. I told her I cannot host them. She ignored me. She is family, my mother shouted. You don't say no to family when they are stranded. They are not stranded, I countered, my voice dropping an octave, becoming cold and hard. They are cheap. There is a difference. Brielle said she wanted to save $300. That is not an emergency. That is a preference. How dare you make this about money? My mother spat. You have always been so obsessed with money. Just because you have it and she doesn't. I have it because I work, I snapped, and she is trying to steal it. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a heavy, loaded silence. What are you talking about? My mother asked. Her tone had shifted from anger to caution. It was a subtle shift, but I heard it. I know about the credit card, Mom, I said. The silence stretched out. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice wavered. It lacked the conviction of the innocent. You are hysterical. You are tired. Just let your sister in. Quinn, we can talk about whatever crazy idea you have in your head later. Don't punish those children because you are in a bad mood. I am not punishing the children, I said. You and Brielle put them in a car knowing I said no. You used them as human shields because you thought I wouldn't have the spine to leave them in the lobby. They have a flight at 6 a.m, my mother pleaded, switching tactics to desperation. If they have to find a hotel now, they won't get any sleep. They will miss the flight. Do you want to ruin their vacation? And there it was. The leverage, the flight, the timeline. They were banking on the pressure of the ticking clock. They knew that if they created a situation where the only solution to their time management problem was my compliance, I would fold. They were weaponizing the airline schedule against an airline manager. That sounds like a personal problem, I said. Quinn! I am hanging up. Mom, if they come here, security will turn them away. If you do this, my mother hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, do not expect to come to Thanksgiving. Do not expect us to forgive this. I am not asking for forgiveness, I said. I am asking for my house back. I ended the call. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had never hung up on my mother before. I had never drawn a line that I didn't immediately erase with an apology. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline dump of breaking a 30-year habit. I tossed the phone onto the couch. I needed to do something with my hands. I needed to verify the madness. I walked into my small home office, a converted closet off the hallway. I knelt before the metal filing cabinet where I kept my important documents, my birth certificate, my social security card, my passport, and the deed to my car. I was organized. I was meticulous. But as I pulled open the drawer, I saw something that made my breath hitch. The hanging folder labeled Personal ID was slightly askew. I pulled it out. I opened it. My passport was there. My car title was there. But my social security card was gone. I rifled through the other papers, thinking maybe it had slipped out. I checked the tax returns folder. I checked the medical records folder. Nothing. I sat back on my heels, the cold carpet seeping through my jeans. I tried to remember the last time I had seen it. It was 6 months ago, the same week my mother had stayed over after my surgery, the same week I had given her the spare key. She had been in this room. She had offered to tidy up my office while I was resting in bed. "Oh, Quinny, you have so much paper clutter. Let me help you organize." I felt a wave of nausea so strong I almost gagged. It wasn't just the credit card I had found out about tonight. That was just the tip of the iceberg. If they had my social security card, and they had my date of birth, and they had my mother's maiden name. I grabbed the stack of mail that had been sitting on the corner of my desk for a week. I usually sorted it on Sundays, but I had been pulling double shifts. I started tearing open envelopes, no longer caring about the paper cuts. Junk mail, bill. Then I found it. A letter from a bank I did not bank with. It was not a promotional offer. It was a statement. Account overdue. Minimum payment required. $250. I ripped it open. The account had been open for 4 months. The balance was nearly $5,000. I grabbed another envelope, a collection notice from a buy now, pay later service for a purchase of designer handbags. I sat there on the floor of my office, surrounded by the confetti of my stolen life. They hadn't just come tonight to save money on a hotel. They hadn't just come to crash. They were coming to check the mail. They knew I was busy. They knew I often let my mail pile up. Brielle probably volunteered to house sit or drop by whenever she could to intercept these letters. But tonight, they were desperate. Maybe a big bill was coming. Maybe they needed to get to the mailbox before I did. The banging on the door started then. It vibrated through the floorboards. I could hear the muffled shouting from the hallway. I stood up. I looked at the pile of debt in my hand. I looked at the empty slot where my identity used to be. My mother's words echoed in my head. Family helps family. No, this wasn't help. This was a harvest. They had been harvesting me for parts. I walked out of the office, clutching the letters in my hand like a weapon. I checked the peephole, but I didn't need to. I knew who was there. I was not going to let them in, but I was done hiding. I marched to the door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood, and prepared to light the match that would burn the bridge down forever. The banging on my apartment door eventually stopped, replaced by the heavy, retreating thud of footsteps and the distinct ding of the elevator. They had not given up. They had simply moved the battlefield to a location where they thought they would have a tactical advantage: the lobby. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were going to the front desk to bully David, the 22-year-old night concierge who was studying for his finals and did not get paid enough to deal with the Warren family circus. They would scream, they would cry, and they would hope that the public pressure would force David to override my lockout order. My phone rang again. It was the front desk. "Ms. George," David's voice was tight with panic. "I am so sorry to disturb you again, but they are refusing to leave. The woman, your sister, she is screaming that her children are freezing, and an older woman just arrived. She claims to be your mother, and she is threatening to call the corporate office." "I am coming down," I said. I hung up. I did not put on shoes. I did not put on a jacket. I was wearing my dark jeans and a simple black sweater, my feet bare against the cold floor. I grabbed the stack of mail, the credit card bills, the overdue notices, the evidence of their theft, and held it in my right hand like a stone. I took the service elevator. It was slower, but it deposited me in a discreet corner of the lobby, behind a large decorative pillar. It allowed me to see them before they saw me. The scene in the lobby was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. The lobby of my building is designed to look like a boutique hotel. Marble floors, high ceilings, modern art, and a seating area with velvet armchairs. Now, it looked like a refugee camp for the entitled. Brielle was standing at the high marble desk, leaning over it aggressively. She was wearing a pink tracksuit that looked expensive but stained. Her hair was in a messy bun that was meant to look cute, but just looked chaotic. "I don't care what the computer says," Brielle was yelling, her voice echoing off the hard surfaces. "My sister lives in 4B. I have a key. The only reason it isn't working is because you people have a faulty system. Open the elevator." Mark, her husband, was sitting on one of the velvet chairs, staring at his phone, completely disengaged from the chaos he had helped create. The 4 children were running wild. The youngest was banging a toy truck against the glass entry doors. The oldest was ripping the leaves off a potted ficus plant. And there, standing right next to Brielle, was my mother. She must have driven separately, racing down the highway the moment I hung up on her. She was wearing her beige trench coat, the one she wore to church, the one she wore whenever she wanted to project an image of respectable authority. She was pointing a manicured finger at David. "Young man," my mother said, her voice dripping with that poisonous sweetness she used before going for the throat. "You are keeping grandchildren away from their aunt. Do you understand the liability here? If these children get sick because you force them out into the rain, I will personally sue this building for everything it is worth." David looked like he was about to cry. He was typing furiously, probably logging every threat. Residents were starting to come in and out. A couple in evening wear walked past, eyes wide, steering clear of the screaming woman. A man walking his dog paused, watching the spectacle with a mixture of amusement and horror. This was it. This was the strategy. Make a scene. Shame Quinn. Make Quinn come down and apologize just to make the noise stop. It had worked for 30 years. I stepped out from behind the pillar. "Stop harassing the staff," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the lobby like a knife through heavy curtains. The entire room froze. Brielle spun around. Her face, flushed with fake outrage, instantly morphed into a mask of relief and accusation. "Quinn!" she shrieked. "Oh my God! Finally! Tell this idiot to let us up. The key wouldn't work, and he is saying you blocked us." My mother turned slower, her eyes narrowing. She smoothed the front of her coat, composing herself. "Quinn, thank heavens. This incompetence is staggering. Get our bags. Mark, we are going up." Mark started to stand up. "Sit down, Mark," I said. Mark sat back down. He looked at Brielle, confused. I walked to the center of the lobby, ignoring the cold marble on my bare feet. I stopped about 10 feet away from them, maintaining a physical boundary that felt miles wide. "David is not incompetent," I said, looking directly at my mother. "He is following my instructions. I blocked the key, I blocked the elevator, and I am blocking you now." Brielle's jaw dropped. She looked around the lobby, checking to see who was watching, then turned back to me with wide, teary eyes. "Quinn, what are you doing? The kids are tired. It is nearly midnight. Why are you being so cruel?" "Cruel?" I repeated. "Cruel is showing up at my home at 11 at night after I explicitly told you no. Cruel is trying to bully a minimum wage employee because you are too cheap to pay for a hotel." "It is not about the hotel," Brielle yelled, stomping her foot. "It is about family. We wanted to see you." "You wanted a free ride to the airport," I corrected. "And you wanted to check my mail." I saw my mother flinch. It was small, a tiny tightening of her lips, but I saw it. She took a step toward me. opening her arms in a gesture that was supposed to look welcoming but felt like a net. "Quinn, please," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "People are staring. You are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing the family. Let's just go upstairs, have a cup of tea, and talk about this like civilized people." "No," I said. "Excuse me?" My mother blinked, as if I had spoken in a foreign language. I said no. You are not coming upstairs. You are not having tea. You are leaving. "Where are we supposed to go?" Brielle wailed, gesturing to the heap of suitcases and the children who were now starting to whine in harmony. "We don't have anywhere else to go." "You have a phone," I said. "Book a room. There is a Hilton 3 miles away. There is a Motel 6 down the street." "They are booked," Brielle lied immediately. "Everything is booked. It is a holiday weekend." "It is a Tuesday in October," I said. "Nothing is booked." "We don't have the money." Brielle pivoted, tears streaming down her face now. "Mark's card got declined. We counted on staying with you. If you don't let us in, we are sleeping on the street. Is that what you want? You want your nieces and nephews sleeping on the concrete?" The residents in the lobby were stopping now. A small crowd had gathered near the elevators. I could feel their eyes on me. Look at that cold woman. They were thinking, turning away a mother and children. My mother saw the audience and played to them. She put a hand on her chest, looking faint. "I cannot believe I raised a daughter to be so heartless, after everything we did for you, after all the sacrifices." "Sacrifices?" I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "You mean the sacrifices I paid for?" I held up the stack of mail. "I found the letters, Mom." My mother went still. Her eyes locked onto the envelopes in my hand. "I don't know what that is," she said, but her voice lacked air. "This is a bill for a credit card in my name that I never opened," I said, my voice rising just enough to be heard by the people watching. "And this is a collection notice for a loan I never took out. And when I checked my files upstairs, my Social Security card was missing." The silence that fell over the lobby was absolute. The background music, some soft jazz saxophone, seemed to blare in the quiet. Brielle stopped crying. She looked at Mom. Mark looked at his shoes. That is probably a mistake," my mother stammered. "Clerical error. Identity theft happens all the time. Quinn, we can fix it, but we need to go upstairs to sort it out." "It happens when you give your mother a key," I said. "And she rifles through your office while you are recovering from surgery." "How dare you?" my mother hissed, abandoning the faint act. Her face twisted into something ugly. "I am your mother. I have a right to ensure this family survives. You have so much, and you share so little. Someone had to take charge." "So you stole my identity?" I asked. "We borrowed it," Brielle shouted, unable to help herself. "We were going to pay it back. Mark is starting a new business next month. We just needed a bridge loan, and your credit score is perfect. You wouldn't even notice." The admission hung in the air, gross and undeniable. The residents watching gasped. David, behind the desk, stopped typing and stared with his mouth open. "I noticed," I said. "I noticed $3,000. I noticed $5,000. "It's just money," Brielle yelled, her face red and blotchy. "You care more about your stupid credit score than you do about us. We are flesh and blood." "You are thieves," I said. My mother stepped forward, her hand raised as if to slap me, then stopped when she realized where we were. She lowered her hand, trembling with rage. "You are ungrateful," she spat. "You think you are better than us because you have this fancy job and this fancy building, but you are nothing without family. If you turn us away tonight, Quinn, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? Dead." I looked at them, really looked at them. I looked at Brielle, 32 years old, still acting like a toddler who deserved a treat. I looked at Mark, a silent accomplice. I looked at my mother, the architect of my guilt, who felt entitled to harvest my financial future because she had given birth to me. And then I looked at the suitcases. There were 4 large suitcases and 3 smaller carry-ons. "You aren't going on a trip, are you?" I asked softly. Brielle froze. What? The luggage, I said. That is too much for a 4-day trip to Cabo. And the kids, they aren't wearing vacation clothes. They are wearing layers. I looked at the tag on the nearest suitcase. It was heavy. It looked like it was packed with books or appliances. Show me the flight confirmation, I said. I don't have to show you anything, Brielle snapped. You don't have a flight, I said. The realization washed over me, cold and clear. You weren't dropping the kids off. You were moving in. My mother looked away. Brielle bit her lip. The landlord evicted us yesterday, Mark said. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was quiet, defeated. Shut up, Mark, Brielle screamed. He kicked us out, Mark continued, ignoring her. We didn't have anywhere to go. Your mom said we could stay with you until we found a place. She said you wouldn't mind. She said you were lonely. I stared at them. The bottomless pit of their deception had no floor. You were going to move a family of 6 into my 1-bedroom apartment, I said, without asking me, and you were going to use my stolen credit cards to fund it. It was temporary, my mother pleaded, seeing the ground crumble beneath her. Just until Christmas. We didn't want to worry you with the eviction details. We thought if we just got inside, you would see how much fun it would be to have everyone together. Fun, I repeated. I turned to David at the front desk. David, I said, these people are trespassers. They do not live here. They are not guests. Please ask them to leave. If they do not leave in 2 minutes, please call the police and report a disturbance. Yes, Ms. George, David said, reaching for the phone. You wouldn't, Brielle whispered. You wouldn't call the cops on your own sister. I am not calling them, I said, walking backward toward the elevator. The building is, and honestly, Brielle, if I were you, I would be more worried about the fraud investigation that starts tomorrow morning. Quinn, my mother screamed. It was a guttural, desperate sound. Get back here. You fix this. You fix this right now. I pressed the button for the elevator. The doors opened immediately, as if the building itself wanted to protect me. I stepped inside. The last thing I saw before the silver doors slid shut was my mother pounding her fists on the concierge desk and Brielle collapsing onto a pile of luggage that contained everything they owned, but no plan for where to go. The silence of the elevator as it ascended was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The silver doors of the elevator were inches from sealing me away from the nightmare when a hand thrust through the gap. The rubber safety bumpers hit Mark's wrist, and the doors shuddered, then retracted with a mechanical groan. We are not done, Mark said. His voice was shaking, not with aggression, but with the terrifying adrenaline of a man who knows he has no other options. He stepped into the elevator, forcing me to step back against the mirrored rear wall. Brielle followed him, her face streaked with mascara, and my mother brought up the rear, her eyes dry and hard like flint. The children were left huddled by the concierge desk, watched over by a wide-eyed David. Get out, I said. My voice was low, trapped in the small metal box with them. You cannot just leave us, Brielle hissed, cornering me. You cannot just drop a bomb like that and disappear upstairs. You said we stole from you. You need to take that back. Take it back? I let out a sharp, incredulous breath. I am holding the letters. Brielle, the bank does not send collection notices for imaginary debts. It is an understanding, my mother interjected, smoothing her coat as if we were discussing a menu change at a banquet rather than a felony. We have an understanding in this family. Quinn, we pool resources. We do what is necessary. You are making this sound like a crime. It is a crime, I said. It is fraud. It is identity theft. It is survival, Brielle screamed, the sound bouncing painfully off the steel walls. You have no idea what it is like. You sit up in your ivory tower with your silence and your expensive coffee, and you judge us. You have never struggled a day in your life. The accusation snapped something inside me. For years, I had swallowed that narrative. Quinn has it easy. Quinn is lucky. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't need the laptop anymore. I had the cloud app. I unlocked it. my thumb hovering over the file I had named the black hole. You want to talk about struggle? I asked, swiping the screen. Let's look at the data, because unlike you, I keep receipts. I held the phone up, the screen glowing bright in the dim elevator lighting. August 14th, 2 years ago, I read aloud, my voice steady and clinical. $1,200. You said it was for a transmission repair. I called the mechanic a week later to check the warranty. He said you never brought the car in. You cashed the check. Brielle rolled her eyes. Oh my God, are you seriously bringing up ancient history? November 3rd, last year. I continued, ignoring her. $850. Emergency vet bill for the dog. I asked for the invoice. You said you lost it. But 2 days later, you posted a photo of a new flat-screen television. So what? Brielle sneered. It was a look of pure contempt, a curling of the lip that revealed exactly what she thought of me. You have plenty. What is $800 to you? A pair of shoes? Why are you counting pennies when your family is drowning? I am not counting pennies, I said. I am counting the $42,650 I have given you over the last decade. That is not pennies. That is my retirement. That is the house I didn't buy 3 years ago because I was too busy paying your rent. You are so selfish, Brielle laughed. It was a jarring, discordant sound. 40,000? That is what you make in, 3 months? You are crying about money you don't even need. I looked at her. She genuinely believed it. She believed that my money was an infinite resource, a natural spring that she had the right to bottle. I am stopping it, I said. As of tonight, not another cent, not for rent, not for food, not for emergencies that turn out to be vacations. You can't do that, Mark said, his voice pleading. We have nothing. Quinn, the eviction took everything. Then you should get a job, Mark, I said. My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm. Her touch, usually warm, felt like a branding iron. Quinn, stop this nonsense. We are upset. We are saying things we don't mean. Put the phone away. Let's go upstairs and I will make you some hot chocolate, and we can figure out a payment plan for the credit card. I promise. We will pay it back. Like you paid back the loan for the wedding? I asked. That was a gift, my mother insisted. I looked down at my phone again, intending to close the spreadsheet and call security again, but as I swiped to close the app, my banking notification center refreshed. There was a new alert. It wasn't from the credit card. It was from my primary checking account, the one I used for my mortgage, the one I thought was secure. Pending transaction, $2,500. Recipient, Serenity Spa and Wellness. I froze. The date was today. The timestamp was 3 hours ago. Mom, I said slowly, looking up from the screen. My mother's eyes flicked to the phone, then away. She took a half step back. What is Serenity Spa and Wellness? I asked. I don't know, she stammered. Why would I know? Because the transfer was authorized using the Voice ID security feature, I said, the one that requires the account holder's voice, or someone who sounds exactly like her. The elevator seemed to shrink. The air grew thin. You mimicked my voice? I asked, the horror of it making my knees weak. You called my bank, pretended to be me, and transferred $2,500 to a spa? It wasn't for a spa, my mother snapped, the denial coming too fast. It is a medical facility. For my back. I am in pain. Quinn, I need treatments that insurance won't cover. You stole money from my mortgage account, I said, my voice rising. This isn't about Brielle's eviction. This isn't about the kids. I looked at Brielle. She looked confused. She evidently didn't know about this one. You took the money for yourself, I said to my mother. You used the chaos of Brielle's eviction as a smokescreen to rob me while I was distracted. I deserve it, my mother shouted, dropping the mask completely. The change was terrifying. The soft, sacrificing mother vanished. In her place stood a woman with teeth bared, her face twisted in entitlement. I raised you, she yelled. I wiped your nose. I paid for your dance lessons. I sacrificed my life for you. And now you sit on a pile of money and begrudge me a few treatments for my back? You owe me. Quinn, you owe me everything. The elevator doors tried to close again, but Mark was still blocking the sensor. I looked past them, out into the lobby. David was standing there, phone in hand, looking terrified. "David!" I shouted, projecting my voice past my family. David jumped. "Yes, Ms. George?" "Are you logging this?" I asked. "I want an official incident report. I want it written down that Marianne Warren just admitted to impersonating me to access my bank accounts. I want the timestamp noted." I am writing it down," David stammered. "Good," I said, "because the police will need it." My mother lunged for the phone. "Give me that." I pulled back, slamming my shoulder against the steel wall. "Don't touch me!" "You ungrateful little brat," my mother hissed, her eyes wild. "You would send your own mother to jail? Over money?" "Over betrayal," I said. "You didn't just take money. Mom, you took my identity. You took my safety. You made me feel like I was crazy for setting boundaries." Brielle looked at our mother, then back at me. For the first time, the united front cracked. Brielle realized that the family pot she thought she was sharing with Mom was actually being skimmed by Mom for herself. "Mom," Brielle said, her voice wavering, "you said you didn't have any money. You said that's why we had to come here. You had $2,000? "Shut up, Brielle," my mother snapped. "This is adult business." "I needed that money for a deposit on an apartment," Brielle yelled, turning on her. "And you spent it on a spa?" "It is a wellness center," my mother screamed back. I watched them turn on each other. It was inevitable. Parasites eventually starve without a host, and when the host cuts them off, they start eating each other. "David!" I called out again, my voice calm amidst their screaming. "Call the police, now. I am pressing charges for identity theft and fraud." My mother stopped screaming. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not the manipulative fear she used to get her way, but the cold, hard fear of consequences. "You won't," she whispered. "Watch me," I said. I stepped forward. I didn't push them. I just walked with such purpose that they instinctively parted. I walked out of the elevator, back into the lobby. "Where are you going?" Mark asked, panic rising in his voice. "I am going to wait for the officers outside," I said. "You can wait here, or you can run, but they have your license plate number from the security cameras, and I have the paper trail." I walked toward the revolving glass doors. I didn't look back. I could hear my mother crying. But this time, the sound didn't make my chest ache. It sounded like noise, just background noise in a city that was finally, truly, starting to feel like mine. But as I reached the doors, Brielle's voice rang out one last time, desperate and vicious. "You think you are free?" she screamed. "You think this is over? Wait until you see what Dad has to say." I stopped. My hand hovered over the glass. "Dad?" The quiet one. The one who sat in the chair and nodded. The one who I always thought was just a victim of Mom's domineering personality. I turned around slowly. "What about Dad?" I asked. Brielle smiled through her tears. It was a broken, ugly smile. "Who do you think gave Mom the idea to use the voice ID?" she asked. "Dad used to work in bank security. Quinn, did you forget that?" The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. My father, the only one I thought still loved me for me. The betrayal wasn't a crack in the foundation. The foundation didn't exist. I had been building my house on a sinkhole. "Tell the police to come," I said, pushing through the doors into the cold Seattle rain. "I have a story for them, too." I stood under the concrete overhang of the building's entrance, watching the rain slice through the yellow glow of the streetlights. The cold air should have been numbing, but my skin felt like it was burning. I could still hear the muffled commotion inside the lobby through the thick glass, my mother sobbing, Mark's frantic whispering. But then the automatic doors whooshed open behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was by the smell of cheap vanilla perfume and desperation. Quinn! Brielle's voice was wet and trembling. It lacked the sharp edge of entitlement it had held in the elevator. Now, it was stripped bare. Please, you have to listen to me. You can't let the police come. I kept my eyes on the wet pavement. The police are already on their way. Brielle, David called them. It is out of my hands. Call them back, she begged. Grabbing my elbow, I ripped my arm away as if she were contagious. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them we are just having a family dispute. Quinn, if they run Mark's ID, he has a warrant. I turned slowly. The rain misted against my face. A warrant? For unpaid fines, she said quickly. Too quickly. Just traffic stuff, and maybe a small claim court thing. It is nothing serious. But if they take him in, the kids will see it. Do you want that? Do you want your nieces and nephews watching their father get cuffed? You brought them here, I said, my voice flat. You put them in the car. You brought them to a crime scene that you created. We didn't have a choice, Brielle cried, her hands shaking as she reached out again, then pulled back. We needed a place to land. We just needed a roof for a few nights until the money came through. I narrowed my eyes. What money, Brielle? She froze. Her eyes darted to the left, then back to me. The tax return. Mark's tax return. It is late. It is October, I said. Tax returns don't come in October. She stammered, looking for another lie, but my brain was already working. It was latching onto something she had said earlier, something that hadn't made sense in the heat of the moment, but was now glowing like a neon sign in my mind. We just needed to get inside. And then I thought about the text message. Your apartment is closer to the airport. And the suitcases, the heavy suitcases that I had assumed were full of their worldly possessions because of the eviction. But if they were evicted yesterday, why did they wait until 11 at night to come here? Why the urgency to get inside the building specifically? If they just needed a bed, they could have come at 5 in the afternoon. They could have come at dinner time. They came at night, when the concierge shift changed, when the lobby was empty. You aren't here to sleep, I whispered. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. You don't care about the beds. I pushed past her, heading back toward the glass doors. Quinn, stop! Where are you going? Brielle screamed, chasing after me. I stormed back into the lobby. The heat hit me, stifling and thick. My mother was sitting on a bench, holding her head. Mark was pacing. The kids were sitting on the floor, playing with a tablet, oblivious to the fact that their parents were criminals. I walked straight to the concierge desk. David looked up, startled. David, I said, my voice sharp and commanding. I need you to check the package log for Unit 4B for today. Quinn, don't! Brielle shrieked from behind me. She lunged, trying to get between me and the desk, but Mark caught her arm, holding her back. Ms. George? David hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. I think there were a few. How many is a few? I asked. 6, David said, reading the screen. 6 large parcels. They were delivered by courier this afternoon. Priority overnight. They are in the storage room. Who signed for them? I asked. The log says. You did, David said, frowning. Or, well, someone authorized on the account. Electronic signature. I turned to Brielle. She was pale, her face a mask of pure terror. You didn't just steal my credit card numbers, I said, stepping closer to her. You used my address. You ordered merchandise with the stolen cards and had it shipped here because your address is burned and you knew I would be at work. It was a classic reshipping fraud. I knew it from the airline industry. Criminals buy high-value goods, laptops, cameras, designer handbags, with stolen credit cards. They ship them to a clean address, an address that matches the credit profile of the victim so the transaction doesn't get flagged by the fraud algorithms. Then, they intercept the packages before the homeowner gets home. That's why you came at 11, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You weren't dropping the kids off. You were picking the boxes up. I looked at the heavy suitcases standing by the elevator. The suitcases are empty, aren't they? I asked. Brielle didn't answer. She was hyperventilating. Open them, I commanded. No, Mark said, stepping in front of the luggage. You have no right. I have every right, I shouted, the sound echoing off the marble walls. This is my building. That is my mail. And you are trying to smuggle stolen goods out of my lobby using your children as a distraction. I walked over to the nearest suitcase, a large, hard-shell gray one. Mark tried to block me, but I shoved him. He was weak, hollowed out by years of grifting, and he stumbled back. I unzipped the suitcase and threw it open. It was empty. There were no clothes, no toothbrushes, no teddy bears for the children. It was just a hollow shell, lined with bubble wrap, waiting to be filled with the 6 boxes sitting in the storage room. I stood up and faced them. My mother was staring at the empty suitcase, her mouth slightly open. Even she hadn't known the extent of it. Or maybe she had, and she was just shocked they got caught. You weren't moving in, I said, looking at Brielle. You were using my home as a distribution center. You were going to pack the stolen goods into these suitcases, tell me thanks for the tea, and leave. You were going to leave me with the debt, the credit card fraud investigation, and the police knocking on my door asking why I ordered $10,000 of electronics. We were going to split the money with you, Brielle screamed. She finally snapped. The tears stopped, replaced by a feral, ugly honesty. We needed the cash. Quinn, Mark owes people, bad people. We bought iPhones, 20 of them. We were going to sell them tomorrow and pay off the debt, and I was going to give you $2,000 for your trouble. $2,000? I laughed. It was a hysterical, broken sound. You stole my identity, ruined my credit, risked my job, and endangered my freedom for a cut? It is a victimless crime, Brielle yelled, gesturing wildly. The insurance companies pay for it. The banks have insurance. Nobody gets hurt. Why do you have to be such a cop about everything? I am the victim, I roared. I am the victim, Brielle. Me, your sister. You can afford it, she screamed back. You have everything. You have this apartment. You have a career. You have no kids. You have no responsibilities. You are just hoarding your life while we are drowning. Why shouldn't you help us? Why is your credit score more important than my life? The lobby went silent. The sheer naked entitlement of her words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Because I earned it, I said softly, and you stole it. I turned to the children. They were silent, watching with wide, terrified eyes. The oldest girl, Maya, who was 9, was clutching her brother's hand. She looked at me. Then she looked at the empty suitcase. She was smart. She understood. Maya, I said gently, I am sorry. Don't talk to her! Brielle lunged at me, but this time, the revolving doors spun. 2 police officers walked in. They brought with them a gust of cold air and the heavy, authoritative presence of the law. We got a call about a disturbance, the first officer said, looking around the lobby. His eyes landed on me, then on the screaming woman in the pink tracksuit, then on the empty suitcase. It's her! Brielle pointed at me, playing her final desperate card. She is crazy. She is attacking us. She threw my luggage. We are just trying to leave. I didn't defend myself. I didn't yell. I just walked over to the concierge desk and picked up the stack of mail, the collection notices, the credit card bills. Officers, I said, my voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly clear. I am Quinn George. I reside in Unit 4B. I would like to report a grand larceny, identity theft, and mail fraud in progress, and the perpetrators are standing right there. I pointed at my sister. And for the first time in her life, Brielle realized that crying was not going to save her. The police officers did not arrest my family in the lobby. That is not how white-collar crimes usually work, even when the suitcase is open and the evidence is damning. They took statements. They took the incident report from David. They separated us. They told Brielle and Mark they were not welcome on the premises, and that a detective would be in touch regarding the fraud allegations. Then, they escorted my family out into the rain. I went upstairs to my empty apartment. double-locked the door, and collapsed. I slept for 3 hours, a fitful, adrenaline-crashed sleep. When I woke up the next morning, the silence in my apartment was absolute. But when I picked up my phone, the noise was deafening. The notification light was blinking a frantic, angry red. I had 37 missed calls, 14 voicemails, and over 100 notifications from Facebook and Instagram. My mother had not wasted the drive home. She had gone nuclear. I opened Facebook against my better judgment. The post was right at the top of my feed, shared by 3 of my aunts and a dozen family friends. It was a photo of Brielle's children sleeping on what looked like the floor of a cheap motel room. Wrapped in thin blankets, the lighting was tragic, the angle was calculated. The caption read, "My heart is shattered into a million pieces tonight. I never thought I would see the day when my own flesh and blood would turn her back on family. Last night, my daughter Quinn, who has been blessed with so much success and wealth, called the police on her sister and 4 innocent grandchildren. She threw them out into the cold Seattle rain at midnight because she didn't want the hassle. We are safe now, huddled in a motel, but I am asking for prayers. It is a dark day when money becomes more important than love. Please pray for Quinn's soul. She has lost her way." I sat on the edge of my bed, reading the comments. They were a firing squad. How could she? That is disgusting. I always knew she was stuck up. Those poor babies. Is there a GoFundMe? Some people let money rot their hearts. Karma will get her. The narrative had been spun so fast and so effectively that I was dizzy. In their version of the story, the credit card fraud didn't exist. The stolen identity didn't exist. The empty suitcases ready to smuggle stolen electronics were just luggage for a sad, displaced family. I was the villain, the wealthy, childless spinster who hoarded her gold and kicked babies into the street. My finger hovered over the comment button. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to post the photos of the fake credit card statements. I wanted to upload the screenshot of the Serenity Spa transaction. I wanted to tell the world that my mother was not a martyr, but a grifter who had stolen from her own child to fund her back massages and her favorite daughter's delusions. But I didn't. In my line of work, you learn that when an engine catches fire, you do not open the hood to fan the flames. You cut the fuel line. I took a screenshot of the post. I took screenshots of the comments, especially the ones from my mother claiming she didn't know why I had done this. I documented the timestamps. I saved everything to the cloud, adding it to the file that was rapidly growing from a folder into a dossier. I did not reply. I did not text back. I deactivated my account to stop the influx of hate, but I kept the data. Silence was not surrender. Silence was ammunition gathering. My phone buzzed again, a text from a number I didn't save, but recognized. It was my Aunt Sarah, my mother's younger sister, the one the family called unstable, because she moved to Arizona and refused to come to Thanksgiving. I saw the post. The text read, "Don't reply to her. She wants a fight so she can play the victim harder." I hesitated, then typed back, "She is lying. Sarah, they stole my identity." The bubbles danced for a long time. Then, "I know. She has been talking about it for years. Quinn, not the theft, but the plan. She used to brag at Christmas that you were their retirement strategy. She said, 'Quinn works hard so we don't have to.' I thought she meant you would help them out in old age. I didn't know she meant she was going to rob you blind. Get a lawyer, a shark, and don't look back." I stared at the phone until the screen went dark. Retirement strategy. I wasn't a daughter. I was a 401k with a pulse. I was an asset class. The pain of that realization was worse than the money. The money could be earned back. The realization that my entire existence had been appraised and leveraged by the people who were supposed to protect me. That was a wound that would never close. I showered. I put on my sharpest suit, a navy blue blazer that made me feel like armor. I drank black coffee, and I went to war. My first stop was not the police station, but the office of waiting counsel. I had called her at 7 in the morning. Ms. Vance was a referral from the airline's corporate legal team, a specialist in family fraud and asset recovery. Her office was glass and steel, high above the city, far away from the emotional swamp of my family's drama. "This is messy, Ms." Vance said, looking at the spreadsheet I had printed out. She was a woman in her 50s with hair cut like a helmet and eyes that had seen every variation of human greed. "You have mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The police report from last night is a good start, but we need to lock down your exposure." "My exposure?" I asked. "If they used your name to buy 20 iPhones and resell them, and then they don't pay the taxes or the debt, the creditors come for you," she explained. "We need to file affidavits of fraud for every single account. We need to freeze your credit with all 3 bureaus, and we need a restraining order." "A restraining order?" I asked. "Is that necessary?" "Your mother is inciting a mob on Facebook," Ms. Vance said, sliding a printout of the post across the desk. "She is weaponizing public opinion to pressure you into dropping the charges. That is harassment. It is also witness intimidation if she tries to contact you to make you change your story. We are cutting them off. Quinn, legally, financially, and physically." I signed the papers. My hand didn't shake. "One more thing, Ms. Vance said, leaning back. "You found the credit card. You found the bank transfer. You found the loan. Is that it?" "I think so," I said. "Think isn't good enough," she said. "Family fraud is rarely isolated. It is like termites. By the time you see them in the wall, they have already eaten the foundation. I want you to run a full tri-merge credit report, not the free one you get on the app, the deep one, the one that shows everything attached to your social security number for the last 10 years. I left her office with a to-do list that felt like a funeral arrangement for my former life. My next stop was not a bank, but a therapist's office. I had booked the emergency appointment online while sitting in the waiting room at the law firm. I knew I couldn't carry this alone. I was an operations manager. I knew when a load was too heavy for the aircraft. "Doctor?" Aris sat in a comfortable chair and listened as I vomited the entire story. The key, the dinner, the text, the suitcases, the empty look in Brielle's eyes when she justified the theft. "I feel guilty," I confessed, staring at the abstract painting on the wall. "They are in a motel. My nieces and nephews are essentially homeless, and I'm sitting here in a suit, suing my own mother." "You didn't make them homeless, Quinn," Dr. Aris said gently. "They made themselves criminals. You are just the one who turned on the lights. Roaches scatter when the light comes on, but you didn't put them there." "But they are family," I whispered. "Family is a behavior, not a blood type," Dr. Grease said. "What they did was predatory. You were groomed. Quinn, you were trained from childhood to equate love with financial submission. That isn't a relationship. That is a hostage situation." A hostage situation. I walked out of the session feeling lighter, but also hollowed out. I sat in my car in the parking garage and opened my laptop. It was time for the final task Ms. Vance had given me. The deep credit report. I paid the $50 for the expedited service. I entered my social security number, the one my mother had stolen from my desk. I answered the security questions. The wheel spun on the screen. Generating report. I took a sip of my cold coffee. I told myself I was ready. I told myself I had seen the worst of it with the spa charges and the iPhones. The report loaded. It was 40 pages long. I scrolled past my mortgage. I scrolled past my student loans. I scrolled past my legitimate credit cards. And then I hit the section labeled Closed Accounts. My breath caught in my throat. There was a car loan from 5 years ago, a Ford Explorer. The status was paid in full. I had never owned a Ford Explorer. But Brielle had. She drove a Ford Explorer for 3 years. She told me she bought it with the insurance money from an accident. She hadn't. She had bought it in my name. She had made the payments, mostly, and then paid it off. Likely using money she had borrowed from me for other emergencies. She had built her credit on the back of mine, without me ever knowing. I kept scrolling. Utility account, electric company, address, 1402 Maple Drive. That was my parents' house. The account had been in my name for 7 years. Medical debt. Urgent care. Status. Sent to collections. Amount. $400. Payday loan. Quick cash. Status. Default. Amount. $2,000. The screen blurred. It wasn't just a recent desperation move. It wasn't just the eviction. They had been using me as a host for a decade. Every time they needed something they couldn't qualify for, they used Quinn. Every time they needed lights turned on, they used Quinn. Every time they needed a car, they used Quinn. I was not a person to them. I was a credit score. I was a resource they mined whenever they hit a vein of bad luck. And the worst part? The car loan. The fact that it was paid off meant they could have done this responsibly. They could have asked, "Quinn, will you co-sign?" But they didn't ask. They took, because asking implies that I have the right to say no. Stealing removes my agency. Stealing ensures they get what they want without having to deal with my boundaries. My phone rang. It was Ms. Vance. "Did you run the report?" she asked. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded dead. "How bad is it?" "It is systemic," I said. "Utilities, cars, loans. It goes back years." "Okay, Ms. Vance said, her voice shifting into combat mode. "Then we are changing the strategy. This isn't just identity theft anymore. This is a pattern of racketeering. We are going to bury them. Quinn, we are going to bury them under so much paperwork and legal pressure that they will never be able to use your name to buy a pack of gum again." "Do it," I said. "And Quinn?" "Yes." "Your father," she said. "I did a preliminary search on him like you asked. The background check." I closed my eyes. "Tell me." "He didn't just work in bank security," she said. "He was fired from his last job at the bank for mishandling customer data. He wasn't prosecuted because the bank wanted to avoid a scandal, but he was blacklisted. That was 6 years ago." I looked at the rain hitting the windshield. "My father wasn't the victim. He was the architect. He was the one who knew how the systems worked. He was the one who knew how to bypass the fraud alerts. He was the one who knew exactly how much they could steal without triggering a federal investigation, until they got greedy with the iPhones." "Add him to the lawsuit," I said. "Add him to everything." I hung up the phone. I looked at the Facebook notification that popped up. Another comment on my mother's post calling me a heartless monster. I didn't care anymore. Let them have the internet. I had the law, and I had the truth. I started the car. I wasn't going home to hide. I was going to the police station to update my statement. The family dispute was over. The war had just begun. The conference room in Miss Vance's office was a glass box suspended 40 floors above downtown Seattle. It was designed to intimidate, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, polished mahogany table, and air conditioning set to a temperature that kept everyone slightly on edge. I sat on one side of the table, flanked by Ms. Vance and a junior associate who was recording the session. On the other side sat my family. They looked diminished. 2 nights in a cheap motel had stripped away the gloss of their entitlement. My mother's hair was flat, her trench coat wrinkled. Brielle looked exhausted, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal, tapping her acrylic nails nervously against the wood. Mark sat with his head in his hands. And then there was my father, Gordon Warren. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table, wearing the same stoic, unreadable expression he had worn my entire life. He looked less like a man facing felony charges and more like a board member bored by a budget meeting. "We are here," Ms. Vance began, her voice crisp and professional, "to discuss the terms of a potential settlement before Ms. George proceeds with filing formal criminal complaints with the district attorney regarding the events of the last 72 hours, as well as the forensic findings regarding her financial history." "Settlement," my mother scoffed, though her voice lacked its usual fire. She reached for a tissue. "Quinn, this is ridiculous. We are family. You dragged us into a lawyer's office? We can work this out at home." "You don't have a home," I said, "and neither do I. Not really, because you turned my address into a crime scene." I reached into the leather portfolio in front of me and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't the spreadsheet of Venmo requests. It wasn't the car loan I had found yesterday. It was the result of the deep dive credit analysis Ms. Vance's team had completed overnight. "We found another card, Mom," I said. I slid the paper across the table. My mother glanced at it and froze. Her hand went to her mouth. "The Emerald Prestige Business Card," I read aloud. "Opened 4 years ago. Credit limit, $50,000. The cardholder is Quinn George, but the business listed is Warren Consulting LLC. And the billing address? 1402 Maple Drive." I looked at Brielle. She looked confused. She didn't know about this one. This wasn't for iPhones or transmission repairs. "There is a balance of $38,000 on this card," I continued. "And looking at the transaction history, it wasn't spent on groceries. It was spent on online day trading platforms, high-risk stock options, crypto futures." I leaned forward. "You aren't a day trader. Mom, you don't even know how to use online banking without calling me for help." My mother started to cry. It was a loud, wailing sound that filled the glass room. "We were desperate. Your father. He wanted to build something. He wanted to leave a legacy. We thought if we could just hit one big trade, we could pay off the house, pay you back, pay everything back." "So you gambled with my name?" I asked. "You leveraged my credit score to play the stock market?" "It was an investment," she sobbed. "We did it for you, so we wouldn't be a burden." "You are a burden." I slammed my hand on the table. "You are a $38,000 burden on a card I didn't know existed, and that is on top of the car, the medical bills, and the cash." "Quinn, please," my mother begged, reaching across the table. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I was weak. I just wanted to help your father feel like a man again after he lost his job." I looked at my father. He hadn't moved. He hadn't blinked. He was watching the city skyline reflected in the glass table. "It wasn't Mom, was it?" I asked. My mother stopped crying abruptly. She looked at my father, her eyes wide with fear. She was protecting him. She had always protected him. She played the loud, chaotic villain so he could remain the quiet, sympathetic victim. "Gordon didn't know," my mother lied, her voice shaking. "It was me, all me." "Stop it. Mom," I said. "Ms. Vance ran the IP addresses for the trades. They didn't come from your iPad. They came from a desktop computer running Linux. You don't even know what Linux is." I locked eyes with my father. "Brielle told me you used to work in bank security," I said. "Ms. Vance told me you were fired for mishandling data, and now I see this, a complex, layered identity theft operation that managed to bypass standard fraud alerts for a decade. Mom isn't smart enough to do that. Dad, Brielle certainly isn't. It was you." The silence in the room was heavy, pressurized. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Brielle stared at her father as if seeing a stranger. My father slowly turned his head. He looked at me. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth I had projected onto them for 30 years. "It was an allocation of resources," he said. His voice was calm, conversational, as if he were explaining why he chose a certain route to drive to the store. "Gordon," my mother hissed. "She knows, Marianne," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "There is no point in the theatrics anymore." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the father. I saw the calculation. "You were a good investment, Quinn," he said. "We put a lot into you. Private tutors, dance camp, the good college. We stretched ourselves thin to make sure you succeeded. It is only natural that the investment yields a return." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I am your daughter, not a stock portfolio." "You are part of the family unit," he corrected. "The unit survives. That is the biological imperative. You were the strongest earner. I used your credit because mine was damaged by corporate politics. I used your name because it was clean. It was a logical decision. If the trades had worked out, you would have never known. You would have your credit score. and we would have our comfort. But the trades didn't work out, I said. You lost, repeatedly. The market is volatile. He shrugged. But the logic remains sound. You have excess capital. We have a deficit. The transfer of value is efficient. I stared at him. There was no guilt, no remorse, just a sociopathic justification of theft. He truly believed he owned me. He believed that by raising me, he had purchased shares in my future earnings. You are a monster, I whispered. I am a pragmatist, he said, and you are being emotional, which is why you are here with a lawyer instead of solving this internally. I am here with a lawyer, I said, my voice hardening into steel, because I am offering you two options, and unlike your trades, neither of them is a gamble. I nodded to Ms. Vance. She slid a thick document across the table. Option 1, I said. You sign this. It is a full confession of guilt for all parties. You, Mom, Brielle, and Mark. It admits to identity theft, wire fraud, and mail fraud. However, I will agree to a civil repayment plan. We will liquidate your assets, the house, the cars, everything, to pay off the debts in my name. You will agree to a permanent restraining order. You will never contact me again. You will never speak my name. You will never come within 500 feet of my home or my workplace. If you violate any term, the confession goes immediately to the district attorney, and I press full charges. My mother gasped. Liquidate the house? Quinn, that is our home. That is your inheritance. There is no inheritance, I shouted. You spent it. You spent my future. So now I am spending your present. And option 2? My father asked, scanning the document. Option 2, I said. I walk out of this room. I hand the full dossier to the police detective waiting in the lobby. He arrests all 4 of you today. Brielle and Mark go to jail. The children go into foster care because both sets of grandparents are also indicted co-conspirators. You all go to prison for a minimum of 15 years given the scale of the fraud. Brielle let out a strangled sob. Foster care? Quinn, you wouldn't... I would, I said, looking her dead in the eye. You brought those kids to a crime scene. You made them accessories. I am not the one putting them in danger. You did that when you decided my life was yours to steal. I looked back at my father. So, Dad, you are the logic guy. What is the efficient move here? Lose the house and the relationship, or lose your freedom and your grandchildren? My father looked at the document. He looked at my mother, who was weeping silently. He looked at Brielle, who was trembling. He pulled a pen from his pocket. The legal fees for a criminal defense would exceed the equity in the house anyway, he muttered. The math favors option 1. Gordon, no, my mother wailed. Sign it, Marianne, he snapped. The game is over. He signed the paper with a flourish. He didn't look at me. He just slid it to my mother. I watched them sign one by one. The scratching of the pen was the sound of severing a limb to save the body. When it was done, Ms. Vance collected the papers. You have 24 hours to vacate the property on Maple Drive. Ms. Vance said. The liquidation team will be there tomorrow at noon. I stood up. I felt lightheaded, dizzy, but incredibly free. Quinn, my mother whispered as I turned to leave. We are your family. How will we live? I stopped at the glass door. I looked back at the people who had raised me, and the people who had tried to consume me. I don't know, I said. But for the first time in my life, that is not my problem to solve. I walked out. I didn't look back. And as the elevator took me down to the street, I realized that I wasn't just descending to the ground floor. I was landing. Finally, safely, landing. The locksmith was the first person I allowed into my apartment after the meeting at the law firm. He was a quiet man with grease-stained hands who didn't ask why I was changing the locks on a unit that already had high-end security. He just removed the old cylinder, the one my mother had compromised, and installed a high-security deadbolt that cost me $400. It was the best money I had ever spent. For the next 3 weeks, my life became a flurry of paperwork and legal maneuvers. Ms. Vance was ruthless. She executed the settlement agreement with the precision of a surgeon. My parents' house was listed for expedited sale. The proceeds were placed into an escrow account to pay off the $38,000 trading debt, the car loan, and the fraudulent credit cards. My family was not on the street, but they were close enough to feel the pavement. They were staying in a small, two-bedroom rental on the outskirts of the city, paid for with the last scraps of their legitimate savings. I didn't visit, I didn't call, but I had one final loose end to tie up. I agreed to meet Brielle one last time, not in my apartment, never again in my apartment, but at a coffee shop 3 blocks away. She looked different. The entitled spark was gone, replaced by a dull, resentful exhaustion. She wasn't wearing her expensive athleisure wear. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that looked like they had been pulled from a laundry pile. She didn't order coffee. She just sat there, glaring at me. "Are you happy?" she asked. Her voice was scratchy. "Mom cries every day. Dad just sits in the corner staring at the wall. You broke them. Quinn?" "I didn't break them," I said, stirring my black coffee. "I just stopped fixing them. There is a difference." "We are losing the house," Brielle spat. "The house where we grew up. The house where we had Christmas. Does that mean nothing to you?" "It means something," I admitted. "It means that for 10 years, that house was being subsidized by my stolen identity. It means that every Christmas present you bought me was purchased with my own money. It is hard to be sentimental about a crime scene." "Brielle." "You could have just paid it off," she whispered. "You make so much money. You could have just absorbed the debt and let us keep the house. Why did you have to be so vindictive?" This was it, the core of the rot. Even after everything, after the police, after the lawyers, after the confession, she still believed that my primary function on this earth was to be their cushion. "Because if I paid it off," I said, leaning forward, "you would have done it again, and again, and again. You didn't steal from me because you were hungry. Brielle, you stole from me because you don't respect me. You think I am a resource, not a person." "I am your sister," she shouted, causing a few people at nearby tables to look over. "Then start acting like it," I said. "Sisters don't steal Social Security numbers. Sisters don't use their nieces and nephews as mules for stolen iPhones." I reached into my purse and pulled out a white envelope. Inside was the spare key, the one my mother had given to Brielle, the one that had started this entire war. Ms. Vance had recovered it as part of the settlement, but I wanted to hand it back personally. I slid the envelope across the table. "I don't need this anymore," I said, "and neither do you. From now on, if you have an emergency, you call 911. You don't call Quinn." Brielle looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. "Mom says she is never speaking to you again," Brielle said. "She says you are dead to her." "I know," I said. "I saw her post. I saw the comments. But here's the thing, Brielle, I used to be terrified of that. I used to stay up at night worrying that if I said no, Mom would stop loving me. But then I realized something in that elevator." "What?" Brielle sneered. "She never loved me," I said, my voice steady. "She loved the lifestyle I provided. She loved the safety net. You can't lose something you never really had." Brielle stood up. She grabbed her bag. She looked like she wanted to scream, to flip the table, to cause one final scene. But she didn't. She was too tired. The reality of having to actually pay for her own life was finally settling in, and it was a heavy weight. "I hope it is worth it," she said. "I hope your lonely life in your quiet apartment is worth losing your family." "It is," I said. She stormed out. I watched her go. I waited for the pang of guilt, the familiar ache in my chest that usually followed a confrontation with her. It didn't come. Instead, my phone buzzed. I looked down. It was a text message from a number I had blocked, but my provider's blocked messages folder still captured it. It was from my father. I opened it, expecting a curse, or a threat, or a plea. Instead, it read, "You executed the leverage correctly. You removed the liability. It was the logical move. I would have done the same." I stared at the screen. It was the closest thing to "I love you" my father was capable of. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was acknowledging that for the first time, I had beaten him at his own game. He respected the checkmate, in a twisted, dark way. He was standing by me, not as a father, but as a fellow pragmatist who recognized that the parasite had been cut loose. I deleted the message. I didn't need his validation anymore. I left the coffee shop and walked back to my building. The rain had stopped, and the clouds were breaking over Seattle. The air smelled like pine and wet pavement. I walked into the lobby. David was at the desk. He smiled at me. A genuine, relieved smile. "Good afternoon, Ms. George," he said. "Quiet day?" "Very quiet, David," I said. "Just the way I like it." I took the elevator up to the 4th floor. I walked down the hallway to Unit 4B. I put my key, my single, unshared key, into the new deadbolt. It turned with a smooth, heavy click. I stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as I had left it. The white rug, the glass table, the aviation models on the shelf, but it felt different. For years, this place had felt like a temporary station. It was a place I kept clean for guests who judged me. It was a place I defended against invaders who felt entitled to it. It was a place I worried about leaving alone. But now, the silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of my choices. It was full of my peace. It was full of the money I had earned and the future I was going to build. A future that belonged to me, and only me. I walked to the window and watched a plane taking off from SeaTac, banking hard to the west, climbing above the clouds toward the sun. I wasn't the backup plan anymore. I wasn't the safety net. I wasn't the bank. I was Quinn George, and for the first time in 34 years, I was home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening from your car, your kitchen, or maybe your own quiet apartment? Please let me know in the comments below to share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people who need to hear it.